So I just watched Dune Prophecy. This is a new HBO series. So I think it's like labeled as an HBO series, and it is on Max. Of course, they took the HBO out of Max, but so basically, when I say that something is an HBO series, it actually means something. Again, um, and yeah, so it is a prequel, I guess, to the Dune movies, because there was like a point in the intro where it's like 10,000 years before the birth of Paul Atreides. So it's like way, way in the past. And yeah, I don't know. This kind of stuck up on me. I honestly didn't realize that this was coming out until like earlier today when I got an advertisement for it, and I was like, oh, that's coming out. Now, I do just want to point out something about me. um, I'm not really the biggest fan of the Dune movies. I remember when I first watched the first one, and when I say the first one, I mean the first Denis Villeneuve one. I never watched was it David Fincher? I think, did he make the one back in the 80s or something? I don't know. Yeah, I watched the first one and I was like, yeah, that was fine. I couldn't really get into it, but it was like, yeah, it was fine. And then like a couple days before the second one came out, I rewatched the first one, and that second time watching it, I was like, wow, this is one of the most boring movies that I have ever seen in my life. Like, I just did not care about anything that was happening in that first Dune movie. I'm just gonna be real. I'm just being real. And then I watched the second one in theaters, and I liked the second one more. But at the end of the day, I still just kind of left. I left the movie being like, I just don't think I care about Dune. So I was like, well, I'm gonna check out the show anyways, just because I review like pop culture nerdy things on this channel. So I'll probably end up watching the show anyways. Although I did bail on the Rings of Power season 2 just because I was so bored by it. And here's what I'll say. I don't mind the show at all. I actually enjoyed watching the first episode of Dune Prophecy. First of all, I think that it feels like HBO is kind of trying to do like Game of Thrones in space, where it's like, oh, look at all these different groups of people, all these different factions, they're all trying to get power or whatever, and there's going to be backstabbing and whatnot, and it's like, and when I realized that that's kind of like what the show is going to be, I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. Now, is it anywhere near as good as as Game of Thrones season 1? No. Or like even the first episode of Game of Thrones? No. But I was like, okay, this is an intriguing sort of this is just like an intriguing sort of setup here. And I'll say this, if you're a fan of Dune, especially if you're a fan of the lore, I do think this is worth checking out and giving a shot, because it's like right off the bat, they kind of like add more like lore to Dune, where it was like, I don't know if people knew this, if I just like missed this in the movies, but apparently, so I guess Dune takes place like not just in the future, but apparently there was like a war between humans and AI. And then like this show picks up like 100 years after that war. So that means like in the Dune movies, it takes place like over 10,000 years after a war with AI. So it's like the Terminator could be in the Dune universe, but like Dune just takes place even after the future in the Terminator, which is just like kind of an interesting concept. So it kind of started off and I was like, oh, like that kind of contextualized everything for me, like way more than the Dune movies ever did, honestly, where I'm like, oh, so it's interesting. Okay, so that's why like the technology kind of is the way that it is, and it was like, I guess they don't use like computers either. Like it kind of made me think about Dune, and it's like, oh yeah, they kind of like don't even really have computers, and so it's like this. It suddenly just made Dune more interesting to me, where I was like, oh yeah, so this is all like futuristic technology, but they don't use technology that has like artificial intelligence in it at all. Like it's just all like very interesting now to me. Like the Dune, like I again, like I've always found Dune to be just like kind of dull, but like that one thing in the intro of the show made me be like, oh, I see you, Dune. I see you, Herbert. Isn't that the guy that wrote the books? His name was like Herbert something. um, and yeah, then as far as relating it to the movies, it's got a lot of the same visuals, and I think it does a decent job of replicating the visuals of the movies. You know, at the end of the day, it is still a TV show, so it doesn't quite look as good. I assume a lot of that probably has to do with Greg Fraser not working on the show. Yeah, I just like looked it up. Greg Fraser is not listed as the cinematographer. It's some guy named Pierre Gill. And yeah, he just is not him. You know, Greg Fraser is him. Pierre Gill is not him. And it's kind of interesting because we also got another spin-off series, HBO spin-off series of a Greg Fraser cinematographized, is that a word? A movie in The Penguin. And I do think that The Penguin is a more successful recreation of the Batman aesthetic. But at the end of the day, it's still pretty good. And there are even like a bunch of like CGI shots where I'm like, oh yeah, that actually looks really good. Like you get a worm. like it is funny though, like in the context of where you get the worm, it does feel just kind of thrown in there where it's like, well, it's Dune. We got to do the worm. There's got to be a big old worm that comes out at some point. And it's like it doesn't really, it's just like it just is there. You know, as far as other like Dune mainstays, you have the weird like, oh, if when the slow blade penetrates the shield or whatever, and it's like, I've always thought that this was just dumb because they try to like explain how the mechanics of it work, but then whenever characters are fighting in the movies, like they're just fighting normally. Like it's not like the whole thing of like, oh, I gotta slice and then I gotta stop and then go slowly in order to penetrate the shield. Like none of that actually ever translates into into like something that you can even really interpret in real time. But they do the thing here, and it's still kind of dumb, but whatever. And then I remember what actually interested me the most about the show was that it was going to be, or at least like I remember it being like advertised as, hey, this is going to be a show that's kind of about the Bene Gesserit, and about them like pulling strings in the background and controlling people, and yeah, that is definitely an element here. Although it's not all about the Bene Gesserit, but it is in large part, like a lot of the main characters are part of the Bene Gesserit, and yeah, like sort of seeing some of their origins, kind of, not really origins, but seeing like more of them in the past, and then how what they're doing in this show seems like it relates to what happens in the movies. Like all of that stuff is actually really interesting. And like in my opinion, the Bene Gesserit are the most interesting characters in Dune. So I like seeing more of them. But then the show also does some like kind of cute things where it's like, oh, I didn't even know this was a thing in the world of Dune. Where like there's a scene where they go to a nightclub, and it's like, oh, I didn't know that nightclubs were in Dune. And there's like a bit where like they like do cocaine, and it's like, oh, I guess cocaine is just in Dune. And then, you know, I also gotta say, overall, like I think what makes me enjoy this more than the movies is that the characters feel like people. Like I feel like the characters in Dune are just so like bland and so like they feel like one-dimensional. Like they feel like robots. They don't. Yeah, like they just don't even feel human, which might be part of like what Denis Villeneuve is going for, maybe, because maybe he's trying to make them seem like this weird futuristic society or whatever. But it's like, but I don't know, like watching this show, it's like I'm actually like interested in the characters. I'm getting invested in their hopes and their desires and their dreams, and I don't know, like I find the characters in the show way more interesting than I ever found Paul Atreides or Zendaya or I don't know, Jason Momoa. Actually, no, Jason Momoa was kind of fun, even in those movies. Oh yeah, because he was like the one character that was like that had a personality. So yeah, I actually find myself enjoying the characters in Dune Prophecy more than the movies. So yeah, I don't know. I think that if you like the movies, I don't think so. Okay, so I'm trying to like think about it through the perspective of someone that loved the movies. Like I'm personally enjoying the show more than I enjoyed the movies, but considering that people like view the Dune movies as these like incredible pieces of cinema, I don't think that those people are going to love this show, but I still think you'll enjoy it because it's a solid show. You know, I don't think it's going to be the next big like critically acclaimed HBO thing, right? I don't think it's going to be anywhere near as critically acclaimed as The Penguin. But I still think you'll enjoy it. I think you'll enjoy a lot of the lore that it adds to Dune, and I think you'll probably see this as like a perfectly fine excuse to be in the world of Dune. You know, where I don't think you're gonna love it as much as the Dune movies, but I think you're gonna enjoy being in this world. So I say check it out. By the way, I will also mention that if you're someone that has never seen Dune, I actually do think that you can just jump into the show because they established the world, in my opinion, honestly, better than the than the movies even did. And it's like a prequel set like 10,000 years ago, so all new characters and whatnot. They do like kind of mention things about the movies, but you don't need to know who Paul Atreides is, even though there's like a voiceover that's like 10,000 years before Paul Atreides or whatever. It's like you'll be fine. So yeah, I'd say check the show out, and if you have checked it out, let me know what you think about it in the comments down below, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.